This crime became one of the most controversial and complex cases ever investigated by law enforcement in the state of Iowa. It was a killing committed in self-defense, but the deeper detectives dug into the details, the more tangled and suspicious the story became. Dozens of possible suspects appeared and disappeared before investigators' eyes, yet not a single solid lead emerged. Years passed before doubts began to surface, doubts suggesting that the entire case might have been built on lies. Today, we'll look into the events that completely changed the life of Tracy Roberts. In 1998, the Roberts family moved from Chicago to the small town of Early, Iowa. The wife's name was Tracy, and her husband was Michael, an Australian by birth. They seemed like a typical, respectable couple, friendly, sociable, and well-liked by everyone in the close-knit community. It was the second marriage for both. Tracy had a son from a previous relationship. Michael was a computer genius who ran an IT business from home. He had lots of ideas and big plans for the future. Tracy was cheerful, outgoing, and athletic. A stay-at-home mom, she kept fit and always looked great. The couple had met online, quickly fell in love, and, incredibly, got married just 18 days after meeting in person. Later, they had 2 children together, a son and a daughter. To everyone around them, they seemed happy and successful. Many admired Michael's determination and intelligence, including a local real estate agent named Mona, with whom the couple had worked on several property deals. Mona liked him, perhaps a bit too much, and was eager to continue collaborating. The feeling, it seemed, was mutual. Mona once told Michael about her 20-year-old son Dustin, a shy and introverted young man who struggled to hold down a job. He would find work for a while, but never managed to stay long. Wanting to help, Michael offered to mentor the young man, to show him the ropes of his business, and see what he was capable of. It sounded like a great opportunity, so Mona agreed. Michael began teaching Dustin about his work, taking him to church, and even on family outings. He became something of a father figure to the young man. To everyone in town, Michael was known as a kind, generous, and pleasant man. His wife, Tracy, was seen as a sweet, friendly mother. Together, the Roberts family raised 3 children. Tracy stayed home with the kids, while Michael traveled frequently for business. Life seemed normal, until the night that changed everything. It happened on the evening of December 13, 2001, in the small town of Early. 35-year-old Tracy Roberts was home with her 3 children, preparing dinner. Food was heating in the kitchen, and upstairs, she was running a bath for her 1-year-old daughter. Her 2 sons, ages 3 and 11, were sitting in the older boy's bedroom watching TV. Suddenly, the boys heard their mother scream, a loud, terrified cry that sent chills through the house. The eldest, Bert, rushed out to see what was happening. He saw his mother struggling in the hallway. Someone had grabbed her by the hair and was dragging her backward as she tried to get into his room. Tracy was holding her baby girl and just managed to pass the child into Bert's arms before the attacker pulled her away. A violent struggle broke out. Tracy slammed the door shut as sounds of a fight and muffled shrieks echoed from the hallway. Then came silence, followed by labored breathing and faint cries for help. Terrified and frozen, Bert didn't know what to do. Then he heard 2 male voices outside the door. They began banging on it and shouting. Panicked, the boy grabbed a baseball bat, ready to defend himself and his siblings. He yelled every curse word he knew, hoping to scare the intruders away. Moments later came the sound of heavy footsteps, angry shouting, and then gunfire. More than a dozen shots echoed through the house. Finally, the door opened, and it was his mother. Bert almost swung the bat at her before realizing who it was. She was alive. Shaking and sobbing, he called 911 around 7 p.m., telling the dispatcher that 2 men had broken into their home and attacked his mother. Police and medics raced to the scene, covering the 30 kilometers to the Roberts home in a matter of minutes. When they arrived, they found the children crying and Tracy hysterical, shouting that the intruder was still upstairs. Following protocol, paramedics couldn't enter until officers cleared the home. Once inside, police found a young man lying in a pool of blood on the 2nd floor. He was dead. There was no one else inside. Tracy was conscious, but struggling to breathe. Medics quickly rushed her to a nearby hospital. The scene looked like a violent, terrifying home invasion. But it would soon become clear that the truth was far more complicated. When word spread, Mona, the Roberts family friend, rushed to the scene, frantic to find her son Dustin, whose car was parked in the driveway. But when she arrived, the property was already cordoned off by police. Officers refused to let her in. When she asked where her son was, they told her the devastating news. He was dead. The man lying in the pool of blood upstairs, the one Tracy had shot, was Dustin, Mona's 20-year-old son and Michael's former mentee. Police gave Mona no details, wouldn't let her say goodbye, and offered no explanation for what had happened inside that house. Would you like me to continue with the investigation, how the self-defense claim began to unravel, and what the police eventually discovered? The woman remained completely in the dark. Meanwhile, 20 kilometers from her home, Tracy finally regained consciousness in the hospital and was able to breathe normally again. Marks remained on her neck that looked like signs of strangulation. The victim of the attack told police what had happened that evening. According to the mother of three, she had been running a bath on the second floor when she heard noise downstairs. She thought her husband had returned early from his business trip and went to check, but instead she saw two men. They began to come up the stairs. Tracy ran to her oldest son's room and handed her little girl to him. She tried to run inside and shut the door, but someone grabbed her by the hair and yanked her back into the hallway. One of the attackers grabbed her pantyhose and began strangling her. During the struggle, Tracy lost consciousness, and the criminals got distracted. When she came to, she heard Bert screaming behind the door. She realized this was the perfect moment to act, so she stood up and ran to the gun safe near the bed in the master bedroom. The assailants caught up to her, but by some miracle, she managed to enter the code and grab the pistol. Tracy pointed the gun at them and pulled the trigger, but nothing happened because the safety was still on. However, the attackers hesitated, and that moment was enough for her. With the next pull, the gun fired. She was stunned by the loud bang. Tracy continued shooting in the direction of the attackers until the entire room filled with smoke. She could not see them, but she heard someone running out of the house. In the end, one attacker fell, and the other escaped. Tracy also heard her frightened children calling her name, so she went to their room. When she opened the door, she barely dodged her son's swing with a baseball bat. He had been preparing to defend himself. Luckily, the children were unharmed. By then, the smoke in the master bedroom had cleared, and Tracy saw 20-year-old Dustin still alive on the floor. According to her, the young man began to get up. She took the gun again and ordered him to stay still. She was in shock and only wanted everything to end. She yelled for him not to get up or move, but Dustin, the son of her friend Mona, did not obey. He started standing and moving toward her. Fearing for her safety and the safety of the children, she fired several more shots, after which Dustin fell again and died. There were no signs of a second attacker. Tracy said that earlier that day, Dustin had come to their house. When he learned her husband was out of town, he stood on the porch for a long time and refused to leave. He behaved strangely, and Tracy eventually had to close the door in his face. According to her description, the second intruder was tall, with dark hair, around 30 years old, but she did not see his face clearly. That evening, Tracy's husband Michael had been on a business trip in Minneapolis. It was completely unclear why the young man he had mentored would attack his wife and children with an accomplice. The second intruder was still at large and could easily return for revenge, so Tracy was terrified. She couldn't enter the house or stay alone. She couldn't sleep and worried only about her family's safety. Yet for a long time, police couldn't find the second suspect. All they had was the vague description Tracy provided. They began investigating Dustin's social circle to determine who might have gone with him to the Roberts home. Many saw Tracy as a real hero. Her story nearly became a national sensation. She gave interviews, and in front of cameras, she and her husband Michael held hands. Calm and steady, she said, "I did what I had to do to protect my family," drawing applause from the audience. Many believed it was a justified killing. Tracy was brave. She had protected not only herself, but also her children. People compared her to a mother bear. But police were not used to taking stories at face value. They began analyzing every detail, believing something about this case didn't quite add up. And the deeper they dug, the more questionable Tracy herself began to seem. Despite the massive public support, There were people for whom this was a tragedy. Most of all, the mother of the shot young man. For her, nothing about Tracy's story made sense. She had nightmares about the attack in which her son died. While grieving, Dustin's mother Mona gave interviews to the media. She was shocked. Dustin had never been aggressive. He was kind, quiet, and had no criminal history. Nothing suggested he would attack the Roberts family. However, Dustin struggled socially. He had even gone to therapy with his mother. He had trouble making friends, was bullied at school, and was never invited to parties. Mona took him to doctor after doctor, but every specialist gave a different diagnosis. Could this have escalated into aggression simply because the young man broke mentally? Tracy told police that she had always feared Dustin. She felt not just uncomfortable, but unsafe around him, even when her husband was present. She avoided him as much as possible and refused to let him be near the children under any circumstances. She was convinced he would hurt them. These accusations devastated Mona. She had never imagined her friend felt this way about her son. To her, everything had seemed the opposite. Police analyzed the crime scene and concluded that Dustin had no clear motive for such a brutal attack, unless it was planned as a robbery. The Roberts home had many valuables, so Tracy suggested the young intruders might have wanted cash or one of Michael's collectible weapons. But the attackers hadn't touched the valuables lying in plain sight. They didn't take jewelry from Tracy while she was unconscious. Instead, they immediately turned violent, as though the goal was assault. Yet Tracy wasn't sexually assaulted. So what was the motive? A sexual attack? An old grudge? Unprovoked violence? None of it made sense to Dustin's family and friends. Then detectives found their first real clue. According to Tracy, her husband had recently told her that she had already been targeted in a previous attack. Sometime before the break-in at the family's home, the woman had been sexually assaulted in a dentist's office while under anesthesia. She woke up during the assault. The doctor tried to persuade her to stay silent and not tell anyone about the incident. In exchange, he promised to seek help at a medical center to deal with his sexual problems and to pay the victim $150,000 in compensation. Tracy told her husband about it, and he insisted she go to the police. Just 2 days after the attempted strangulation of the mother of 3, she was supposed to appear in court and testify against the dentist, accusing him of rape. Investigators believed he could have been the second person who broke into her home that night, planning to eliminate the victim of his assault so she couldn't testify against him. However, the detectives learned that the dentist had no connection to Dustin and had a solid alibi. He had been at work. After that, the woman remembered another person who might have wanted her dead. This man was far more believable as a suspect than the dentist. It was John Pittman, Tracy's first husband. They had met at Northwestern University in Chicago, where both were studying medicine. John was a fourth-year student doing his internship at a Chicago clinical hospital, while 19-year-old Tracy was a first-year radiology student. He was domineering and aggressive, but Tracy had grown up with a controlling father, so she was used to such behavior and considered it normal. Tracy married him, and later the couple moved to Denver, Colorado, where she gave birth to their son. Her first husband tried to control every aspect of her life, and she accepted it as normal. But over time, the marriage began to fall apart. Tracy said he often abused her, especially during intimacy. Eventually, she grew tired of enduring the physical abuse, and they separated in 1992. A custody battle followed over their 3-year-old son, Bert. The boy admitted to his mother that his father had molested him. Thus began a heated legal fight. There was no evidence to support the molestation claims, but Tracy kept insisting in court that it was true. During the dispute, the boy lived with her. The custody case dragged on and was still unresolved at the time of the attack, making John Pittman a plausible suspect, either as the second intruder or as someone who hired 2 hitmen. Even little Bert believed his father could have been involved. Police contacted their colleagues in Virginia, where John lived, to confirm or deny his alibi. It turned out he did have a solid one. He was working at the clinic during the crime. John denied any involvement, and investigators found no evidence against him. By then, he was a successful plastic surgeon with a flawless reputation. No one who knew him believed he would molest his son or murder his ex-wife, whom he no longer cared about. Still, detectives didn't remove him entirely from the suspect list and continued to consider him. Months passed, and the investigation did not move forward. Tracy grew increasingly anxious. She didn't feel safe while the second attacker was still at large. She feared he would return to take revenge on her. During this period, police developed interest in yet another suspect. Investigators started taking a closer look at Tracy's second husband, Michael. Upon closer examination, it turned out their marriage had been dead for a long time. The couple no longer had any affection. Could Michael have tried to get rid of a wife he no longer wanted? Many people supported this theory, and not without reason. Tracy's older son, Bert, revealed the terrifying truth about his stepfather. Michael was extremely strict and often punished the boy harshly, inventing cruel punishments for the smallest misbehavior. For reasons unclear, Tracy ignored her husband's aggressive behavior and did nothing to protect her children. Perhaps she had grown so accustomed to such treatment since childhood that she failed to recognize it as abuse. Another detail that raised suspicion was Michael's behavior at the hospital when he came to see his surviving family members. Detectives were alarmed. He seemed genuinely surprised to see them alive, as if that had not been part of the plan. However, Michael also had a solid alibi. He had been on a business trip in another city, confirmed by surveillance footage. He was given a polygraph test and failed it, clearly hiding something. Detectives believed there was a high probability he was involved in planning the attack. But after a full year of investigation, they were still unable to find any evidence proving his guilt. Still, Michael behaved strangely. He never told Tracy about the polygraph results and did not show any sympathy for her situation. This raised even more suspicions, especially after she eventually learned he had failed the test. Tracy became extremely paranoid. She believed both of her husbands were working together and wanted to get rid of her to obtain full custody of the children. She told the sheriff about her suspicions and supported them by mentioning that Michael had mumbled something about the conspiracy in his sleep. Detectives dug deeper into Michael and discovered that his IT business was failing and he had small debts. But the couple had life insurance policies worth millions of dollars. Michael might have wanted to eliminate Tracy to collect the money and solve his problems. He was also close to Dustin and could have persuaded the young man to help him. But these were only theories. There was still no proof of Michael's involvement. Meanwhile, tensions between the Roberts spouses escalated. In 2004, 3 years after the attack, the marriage ended. It was Michael who filed for divorce. Police still had no grounds to arrest anyone. Tracy moved with the children to Omaha, changing not only her residence, but also her job and even her name. She was hiding from everyone and afraid of another attack. Her friend Mona, the mother of the killed Dustin, also moved to another city with her daughters. It turned out the tragedy had taken not only Dustin's life, but his father's as well. 1 year after the attack, on Thanksgiving Day in 2002, Dustin's father took his own life at his son's grave. The man had been destroyed by grief and by the judgmental looks of people who believed his son was a dangerous criminal. Mona was completely devastated by the chain of deaths, but swore she would clear her son's name of all the accusations. She kept torturing herself, trying to understand what had really happened to her son that day and why he had ended up in Tracy's house at all. The mother simply refused to believe that he had truly intended to harm the people who had been his mentors. The young man valued his relationship with that family immensely, especially because he struggled with social adaptation, and with them he felt safe and was deeply grateful to Michael. The woman even considered filing a wrongful death lawsuit to hold Tracy Roberts accountable for Dustin's death and to learn the truth about what had happened that night. Her attorneys launched their own investigation and quickly noticed inconsistencies in the victim's story, which changed each time she retold it. In one version, Tracy recognized Dustin immediately. In another, she realized it was him only later. In some retellings, she claimed she fired from different positions in the room. Because of these contradictions, confusion in the details, the lawyers concluded her story was a lie. On the day of the killing, Dustin's mother had been out Christmas shopping. She called home to check if Dustin had woken up, because he had an important meeting scheduled that day. Her daughter answered the phone and said that Michael has already left. Mona was relieved, thinking it meant Dustin had woken up on his own and gone to take care of business. But later, Mona's nephew called and said that something had happened at the Roberts home. Mona rushed there, thinking Tracy and Michael had killed each other. She never imagined her own son had been the one killed. Mona also stated that the day before, Tracy herself had invited Dustin to her house to help her with something. She believed that the woman had lured Dustin there in order to kill him. The mother was certain Tracy had something to hide. But nobody listened to Mona until 7 years after the break-in, when the investigative team was replaced and the case was re-examined. After reviewing the case, the new detectives also began to suspect that Tracy was not the hero who saved her children, but possibly a manipulative killer. There had been no signs of forced entry or attempted robbery in the house. How then could two men have entered the home? Dustin had 9 gunshot wounds. He had essentially been executed at close range, left with no chance of survival. And there was absolutely no trace of a second intruder. The new investigators decided to speak with Tracy's first husband. It turned out he was nothing like the monster she had described. The man reported that it was actually Tracy who had episodes of aggression, so severe that once she pointed a gun at him and threatened to kill him. She fired into the ceiling, and he had to call the police. Tracy later told investigators she had been attempting to take her own life, which allowed her to avoid punishment. In reality, it was Tracy, not John, who had been violent, unfaithful, and financially irresponsible in the marriage. She drained his bank accounts, and he eventually hired a private investigator because he suspected she was cheating. The investigator confirmed that various lovers left the house while her husband was at work. Eventually, John filed for divorce because he feared his own wife and was tired of her behavior. He was worried about their son growing up in an unhealthy environment with a mentally unstable mother, and therefore fought hard for custody, something that enraged Tracy. Although she tried to turn their son against his father, she had no evidence of abuse. She realized her ex-husband now had a far better chance of obtaining custody than she did, and this may have driven her to commit a crime in order to frame John. The dentist who supposedly raped her while she was under anesthesia had, in reality, been subjected to inappropriate advances from her for a long time, and he was ready to prove it. His office had cameras, and the recordings supported his account. When Tracy learned about the existence of this footage, she withdrew her lawsuit the day before the crime took place. Tracy's second husband, Michael, whom she accused of beating and stalking her after their separation, also denied all of this during questioning. He claimed that Tracy constantly cheated and had a terrible temper. He had tolerated her behavior for the sake of the children, but eventually divorced her. Michael said he had been a strict father, but had never hit his wife or kids, and insisted Tracy manipulated the children against him after the divorce. He later moved to California, focused on his IT business, and finally managed to rebuild it. It seemed that the woman had slandered everyone around her. She had tried to portray herself as a victim of abuse by every man in her life. But in reality, the opposite was true. Detectives became convinced that Tracy's account of the events of December 13, 2001, was another carefully crafted lie. They needed to meet the victim face-to-face, but by then the mother of 3 had not only moved to another state and changed her personal information, she continually updated her contact details, making it difficult to locate her. Police interviewed Tracy's close friends to understand her motives. One of them, now considered a new potential witness, revealed crucial details when pressured by investigators. She had helped Tracy clean the house after the attack. When Tracy showed her the spot from where she had supposedly fired at Dustin, the friend realized the story was physically impossible. There was no way that a petite woman could have overpowered 2 men in the way she described. None of it made sense. Investigators had to re-examine all evidence. Among the items was an old computer found in the back seat of Dustin's car. Tracy used it as proof of an attempted robbery, claiming the computer belonged to her husband. But it made no sense for Dustin to steal that heavy machine when far more valuable and portable items, cash, jewelry, were left untouched in plain sight. In the car's front seat, police found a pink notebook in which Dustin had allegedly written a plan for the attack shortly before his death. The note said his task was to kill Tracy Roberts and that the client was her first husband, John Pittman. But something was off. The note contained too many details about the crime, details the young man could not possibly have known beforehand. The handwriting was Dustin's, but it looked as though he had written it under dictation, under false pretenses, or even at gunpoint. Dustin's mother did not recognize the notebook. It was pink, something that looked more like a woman's item, and Dustin disliked that color and would never have bought such a notebook. He also never kept any diaries. There were no other notes in it besides the crime plan, which looked as if the notebook had just been purchased and used only once for this specific set of instructions. It was becoming increasingly obvious that Tracy herself could have given Dustin that notebook in order to stage the crime. According to the new version of the investigation, the young man who was shot was not an attacker at all, but a victim of a deceitful criminal. He was easily manipulated, trusting, and Tracy took advantage of that. At that time, the woman had already started having problems in her new town in Nebraska, where she had moved earlier. She had been accused of document forgery and falsifying her own identity, which became grounds for a search of her apartment. During the search, investigators found disturbing material on Tracy's computer: eccentric pornography, photos of dead bodies, and weapons. 10 years after the killing, the police finally uncovered the truth. On July 27, 2011, they arrested the woman who had previously been celebrated as a hero who saved her children. The key push for the detectives came from the memories of the friend who had helped Tracy clean the house, as well as another acquaintance who knew about the notebook with Dustin's confession. The investigators determined that all of those statements had indeed been written earlier under Tracy's dictation. There were no signs of forced entry found in the house. The marks on Tracy's neck could have been made by herself, and the fact that they were merely small, non-life-threatening scratches supported this. The pattern of gunshot wounds on the victim's body also did not match the woman's description. The part of her story where Dustin allegedly tried to get up after being shot several times was absurd. As experts noted, after such wounds, he would have already been dead. Experts who studied crime scene photos carefully analyzed the blood spatter and concluded that Dustin had not stood up at all. All the bullets had been fired from above, directed downward, while he was lying on the floor. This completely contradicted Tracy's story of an attack. She had shot the young man at a moment when he posed no threat to her. Despite this, the defense insisted that Tracy had been saving her children. It was a compelling story, designed primarily to convince the jury of the defendant's innocence. Her lawyers emphasized that most of the evidence was circumstantial. Their strongest asset was meant to be Bert, the defendant's eldest son. He testified that he had heard male voices outside the door and had seen someone dragging his mother away from it. According to the teenager, the attacker said that his mother was dead and that he would be next, speaking through the door. Later, he said he saw the wounded young man trying to stand up, just as his mother described. But the credibility of his testimony was questionable. In Tracy's earliest version of the story, the children's bedroom door had still been closed at that moment, meaning her son simply could not have seen what he later described. The prosecutor argued that the mother had implanted all of this in his mind. The prosecution insisted that the defendant murdered Dustin in order to frame her husbands, put them behind bars, gain sole custody of her children, and obtain complete control over the money. They believed this was the main motive. According to them, that day Tracy lured Dustin to her home at gunpoint and forced him to write the notes in the notebook. Then she shot him, staged an attack on herself, inflicted minor injuries on her own neck, and placed the notebook and computer in his car. Even the medical examiner confirmed that with such superficial injuries, she could not have lost consciousness, another contradiction in her narrative. After a long review of the case materials, the jury found Tracy Roberts guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. When the verdict was read, Tracy burst into tears in court. But no one believed her. There were no actual tears. She attempted to perform yet another dramatic scene. The one who suffered most emotionally was Bert, who genuinely believed that on that cold night his mother had saved all of her children's lives and was now unjustly imprisoned. He continues to visit and support her to this day. Tracy's second husband eventually received permission from child services to take the children. A few years later, he and his new wife moved back to Australia. Tracy continues to insist that she is innocent. She is serving her sentence at the Iowa Correctional Institution for Women in Mitchellville. If you enjoyed this work, support the video with a like and subscribe to the channel. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe Tracy is truly a victim who was wrongfully convicted, or did she stage the attack herself? And I also recommend watching these videos. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.